On the 2nd of December 1943, Polish resistance fighters attacked a German convoy in ul.Puławska in Warsaw. As a result of this attack, 5 police officers and 1 SS man were killed and several others were wounded. The response of the Nazi occupiers was to kill 100 Poles who were being held hostage, and this poster lists those that were killed alongside their dates of birth. The poster is signed by the person responsible for the killing, the head of the SS and police in the Warsaw district. The name of the person who held this rank is missing from this and other posters, but it was known. Franz Kutschera was the head of the SS and the police in the Warsaw district. In this video, I shall look at his life. Franz Kutschera was born on the 22nd of February 1904 in Oberwaltersdorf, a village around 30 kilometers to the south of Vienna where his father was a gardener. The plans for the boy were to send him to a technical school in Budapest, then still part of the Austro Hungarian Empire. However, in 1914 World War I broke out and these plans were interrupted. Despite his young age, on leaving school he went off to join the Austrian Navy, where he probably served as a cabin boy. Despite being a largely landlocked country with a short coastline, Austro Hungary had a fleet based in Pola, now Pula in Croatia. Furthermore, unlike the German Navy, which was largely bottled up in its home ports for most of the war, the Austrian Navy took part in a number of actions in the Adriatic Sea. However, the war was lost, the Austro Hungarian Empire broken up, and there was little for the 14-year-old to do but to return home and follow his father's footsteps as a gardener. However, he did not stay at home at Oberwaltersdorf. In 1920 he found work in the newly created state of Czechoslovakia, where the economy was stronger than in Austria. Czechoslovakia had been almost entirely within the Austro Hungarian Empire, and there was a large German-speaking population, so that to a large extent he would have felt as though he were at home. It appears as though Kutschera returned to Austria in 1922. For most of the 1920s his movements are not clear, but we do know that he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party on the 5th of December 1930 with the membership number 363031. On the 1st of November 1931 he joined the SS with membership number 19659. Should you ever visit Klagenfurt, you might want to pop into the McDonald's on Wiener Gasse. McDonald's was not always here. Earlier it had been called the Tanzcafé Lerch, and before that the Café Lerch. The singing career of Udo Jürgens, perhaps the most successful Austrian entertainer of all time, began here. In 1951, at the age of 17, Udo Jürgens won a composing competition organised by Austrian radio with a song entitled Je t'aime. He was hired to appear at a rate of 5 shillings per hour in the Klagenfurt Tanzcafé Lerch, appearing under the stage name of Udo Bolan. He formed the Udo Bolan Quartet with Johnny Richards from the United Kingdom on the drums, Klaus Bemmel on guitar and Bruno Geiger on bass. Obviously, the authorities in Klagenfurt would like to commemorate one of the most successful performers in Austrian history, and a logical choice would be the place where he started his career. What better place than to do it than the local McDonald's? However, it was not to be. The cafe had a dark history that the authorities in Klagenfurt would rather forget. The man who hired them in 1951 was the owner of the Tanzcafé Lerch, Ernst Lerch. He had just come back from a 3-year stint in Italy where he had been hiding from the authorities. He might have felt that they were after him, as he was a major participant in the murder of some 1.6 million people in the Lublin region only a few years earlier. The cafe had been started by his father, who had named it the Café Lerch. As you can see by looking it up on Google Maps, it's in the historical centre of Klagenfurt. With the Austrian defeat in World War I, a war its leaders had started, Klagenfurt, which had previously been hundreds of kilometres from the border, now found itself very close to the new border with Yugoslavia, effectively the successor state to the one that Austria had attacked when it started the war. This clearly provided for a great deal of resentment and bitterness. One of those embittered by the war was Odilo Globocnik, himself, judging by his name, clearly of Slavonic origin, but born in Trieste in 1904, then one of the largest cities in Austro Hungary. After the defeat, his family came to Klagenfurt. He became a regular at the cafe, as did other future major Nazi criminals such as Ernst Kaltenbrunner and Franz Kutschera, even after the National Socialist Party was made illegal in Austria in 1933. Franz Kutschera must have impressed his friends at the Café Lerch. From July 1935 to the 16th of March 1938, he was the commander of the 90th SS Standarte Kärnten, based in Klagenfurt. He was even imprisoned for belonging to the illegal Nazi movement. Union between Germany and Austria had been discussed in the past, although expressly forbidden under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Italy had been the guarantor of Austrian independence, but by early 1938 the political situation in Europe had changed. Under increasing pressure, Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg announced that there would be a referendum on a possible union with Germany versus maintaining Austria's sovereignty. The referendum was to be held on the 13th of March 1938. In an attempt to prevent a referendum, Hitler threatened an invasion and pressured Schuschnigg to resign. A day before the planned referendum, on the 12th of March 1938, the German army crossed the border into Austria. Austria's neighbours gave no support, ignoring the obvious threat to them at a later date, and the Austrian army did not resist. A plebiscite was held on the 10th of April 1938, resulting in a 99.7% approval for the Anschluss, the union between Austria and Germany. Given the time that the Nazis had had to prepare for the results, one might have thought that they would come up with a more believable figure. One, of course, could say the same thing for Putin and the so-called referendum in Crimea in 2014.
Überall in Österreich, wohin die deutschen Soldaten kamen, wurden sie wie Brüder aufgenommen. Besonders herzlich war der Empfang in der Steiermark und in Kärnten.
Anschluss was great news for Kutschera. No more fear of being arrested for his political ideologies, and from now on there was the chance of several highly paid jobs in the National Socialist administration. First of all, he became a deputy to the Reichstag, which didn't meet often, but the role was paid and it had its kudos. Just before the annexation of Austria, Kutschera had become the Gauleiter of Carinthia, that is to say the governor, but following the Anschluss he was demoted to the position of deputy Gauleiter. This probably didn't bother him too much, because after the death of Gauleiter Hubert Klausner in February 1939 he served as acting Gauleiter of Carinthia for 2 years. Clearly, this was also not a role that required too much attention, like that of his honorary appointment to be a judge at the People's Court. It's good though for passing death sentences. For his day job, Kutschera was appointed to the headquarters of the 30th SS district based in Kassel. In 1939 he also served as temporary Gauleiter of Salzburg and plenipotentiary of the Reichsdefense Commissioner in Military District number 18. Shortly after the Anschluss, Adolf Hitler paid a visit to Klagenfurt on the 4th of April 1938. I believe that he was officially welcomed by Kutschera. Here we can see Hitler inspecting his guard of honour. Hitler stayed at the Sandwirt Hotel. Here he is on the balcony. He also got the opportunity to get in some tourism and had a drive around the streets, no doubt with Kutschera close by. He visited the town hall where he got the chance to talk to Prince Bishop Adam Hefter, and here we can see him leaving the town hall. In April 1941, Heinrich Himmler paid a visit to the Mauthausen concentration camp near Linz. Although it's not part of his domain, it was geographically close, and we can see Franz Kutschera in this photograph accompanying the Reichsführer SS. Is the location of the former concentration camp at Mauthausen, and we don't know how many people died here, but it's into 6 figures, including the sub-camps of Mauthausen. Mauthausen was based around this quarry, which we can see in front of us right now. And this was the location of terrible suffering for many people. Many people were actually killed here. People were thrown off the rocks above there. For example, in July 1942, a transport of people, Jewish people from Holland, was brought here, and they were thrown off the rocks up there. To the left is some steps. Now today these steps are regular. It was built after the war in that way, but the steps were there, and the steps were the scene of terrible suffering as people went back to the camp where their accommodation was at the top. After the German invasion of Yugoslavia in April 1941, Kutschera was transferred to Carniola, a territory which approximately corresponds to the modern state of Slovenia. Carniola was annexed into the Reich after the conquest of Yugoslavia. Here, Kutschera held the position of deputy Gauleiter. On the 22nd of June 1941, Nazi Germany turned on its ally, the Soviet Union. The war became particularly barbarous. Kutschera was attached to the staff of the Higher SS and Police Command for Central Russia and Belarus, where he was the Reich Commissioner for the Consolidation of German Nationhood, an organisation whose aims were to include the incorporation of German-speaking people into the Reich, usually in occupied areas, as well as the pacification of those non-German populations deemed to be harmful to the Germans. In effect, this meant forced expulsion or murder of the non-German population. However, it could also mean the more or less forced depopulation of German communities from places they had lived for many generations in order for them to colonize lands the Nazis had annexed to the Third Reich. This role fitted his second job, which was as commander of the police battle group Kutschera, Kampfgruppe Kutschera, which fought against Soviet partisans in Belarus. As Kutschera had no staff training, he commanded it only nominally, while the actual command was held by experienced officers. Kutschera's first name, Franz, was given to a vicious anti-partisan operation in the winter of 1942 to 1943 in the area south of Bobruisk, in which over 2,000 civilians were murdered. On the 5th of May 1943, he held the position of SS and police commander in the Russia Central Rear area, later changed to Mogilev district. For his achievements, and I use that word as the Nazis would have done, during the pacification actions in Belarus, he was awarded the Iron Cross, First Class. Himmler, of course, had known Kutschera for some time. Both Hitler and Kaltenbrunner had met him before the war, and thus, when the post of SS and police commander for the Warsaw district became available, Kutschera, a man with no pity, was the obvious choice. On the 25th of September 1943, Kutschera was appointed SS and police commander in the Warsaw district of the General Government. He took up this position in October. Kutschera's arrival in Warsaw coincided with a drastic intensification of terror against the inhabitants of the Polish capital. The methods by which the Nazis tried to terrorize the city were mass roundups and executions of hostages, carried out in retaliation for any anti-German protests or signs of resistance. The shootings were carried out not only in relative secrecy in the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto, which was off bounds to the population, but also openly on the streets of the city. Moreover, in addition to political prisoners arrested by the Gestapo, ordinary Warsaw residents who left their homes either to go to work or shopping or for some other reason could be picked up in street roundups. The result could be being sent to work as labourers in Germany or to be held as a hostage in order to be shot in revenge for some resistance activity. In these circumstances, no resident could be sure of his or her life, and every departure from home could become a journey into the unknown. Kutschera was not the originator of this policy. It existed before he arrived in Warsaw. However, Kutschera implemented it to the letter and without reservations, apparently even overruling the occupation police, who sought a less aggressive stance, believing that acts of terror by the occupier led to increased resistance activity. The posters that appeared informing the locals of the mass killings bore his position, even if it was usually signed anonymously, SS and police commander in the Warsaw district. During the time that Kutschera was head of the police and SS in the Polish capital, at least one Warsawian was killed every hour, at least 4,300 people. This is how he got the name of the Executioner of Warsaw. The Directorate of Underground Resistance, a branch of the Polish Home Army, issued a death warrant for Kutschera in December 1943. At the same time, and totally independently, acting on his own initiative, Alexander Kunitsky, a former army officer who had voluntarily returned to Poland in the summer of 1940 and by now working with the Home Army, attempted to locate the residence of Kutschera. His route from home to office was discovered and plans were made to assassinate him. The first attempt on Kutschera's life was prepared for the 28th of January 1944 but had to be aborted after Kutschera failed to leave his home that day. A second attempt was planned for the 1st of February 1944. At 8:50 that morning, a group of Home Army soldiers were in place, armed with various British, Polish and German weapons. At 09:09, Kutschera left his apartment at Alea Rouge No. 2 in his limousine. As he approached the gate of the SS headquarters, the Gawronski Villa at Alei Ujazdowski 23, he was blocked by an Adler Triumph Jr. driven by Michał Isajewicz, known as Mish. Bronisław Petrasiewicz and Zdzisław Paradzki jumped out of the Adler, ran up to Kutschera's vehicle and opened fire. The driver was killed and Kutschera badly wounded. Michał Isajewicz, following up, finished off Kutschera with a shot in the head. They then searched his body for documents. Meanwhile, two other vehicles moved in position as German guards stationed nearby opened fire. An intense shootout then erupted, which led to 3 of the attackers being wounded, although all managed to get away. In retaliation for Kutschera's death, the Nazis shot 300 hostages the next day, people who had had absolutely nothing to do with the attack. 100 hostages were murdered in a street execution at the corner of Alei Ujazdowski and ulica Chopina, near the site of the attack. This poster went up in Warsaw on the 2nd of February 1944, informing about the execution of 100 Polish hostages in retaliation for the death of 2 Germans, including Kutschera. It was signed by the commander of the SD and security police for the Warsaw district, Ludwig Hahn. I've done a separate video on the life and crimes of Ludwig Hahn. A link will appear below. The remaining 200 were murdered in the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto. A fine of 100 million zloty was levelled on the population of the Warsaw district. Here you can see a receipt for one individual payment towards this fine. Polish restaurants were ordered to close. Poles were banned from driving cars and motorcycles in Warsaw, and the curfew was moved from 2000 hours to 1900 hours. As with Heydrich less than 2 years earlier in Prague, on the 4th of February 1944, the German occupation authorities organised a ceremonial funeral for Kutschera. In this photograph we can see the procession in Adolf Hitler Platz, now called Pilsudski Square. The Polish population was temporarily displaced from the houses along the funeral procession route. A very peculiar element of the funeral ceremony was the wedding of the deceased Kutschera with Jane Lillian Steen, his Norwegian partner, who was pregnant. Kutschera was then buried in the Heroes Cemetery, which the Germans organised at the Powązki Military Cemetery in Warsaw. A wedding ceremony with the deceased may seem a bit odd today, but it was quite common in the Third Reich. Hitler made a special order in November 1941 which provided for the possibility of recognising the marriage of a soldier killed at the front whose fiancée was pregnant. In such a case, the wife was considered a widow and the child was considered legitimate. Thanks to this, the bride could count on state assistance in the form of child allowance and a widow's pension. During the war, as many as 25,000 posthumous weddings of this type were performed. However, usually the soldier who died at the front was not present at the wedding ceremony, for obvious reasons. Indeed, this is the only case that I know of where the dead groom was present at his own wedding. In France today, this form of wedding is recognised by law. In 1959, the fiancée of Irène Jodot drowned just before the wedding, for which both had already completed the formalities. The woman applied for a recognition of the marriage. An article was then added to the civil code stating that in such a situation the president may authorize the wedding. Every year, dozens of posthumous marriages are concluded in France. This option is most often used by the life companions of soldiers and policemen and the likes who died in the line of duty. The mass shooting in revenge for the death of Kutschera was one of the largest street killings to take place before the Warsaw Uprising. It was also one of the last large street killings before the uprising. It would seem that the Nazis realized that mass murders were not having the desired effect on frightening Poles. The mass killings did resume during the Warsaw Uprising, but they were the work of killers sent to Warsaw after the beginning of the uprising. Even such killers as Erich von den Bach-Zalewski attempted to put a stop to them as being counterproductive. In October 1944, the honorary title Franz Kutschera was given to the 90th SS Standarte in Klagenfurt, the unit he had once commanded. From December 1914 to the summer of 1915, the front stood here. In these swamps along the river Ravka, thousands of German and Russian troops were killed. Close to here was the location of the first ever gas attack. The deep hole in the ground that can be seen here was the result of exploding a mine in an effort to force the Russian line. The bodies of both German and Russian troops can be found in many cemeteries here. However, in 1990, they were joined by the bodies from World War II. Kutschera's remains were dug up from the Powiański cemetery in Warsaw, and with 2,500 bodies from World War II, they were placed in the German war cemetery here. However, he was buried anonymously due to his crimes. His name was not placed on a stone. He may have been joined by the body of Jürgen Stroop, the person responsible for the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto, who was hanged after the war in Warsaw. The wife who Franz Kutschera married after death was Jane Lillian Stein. She was born in 1918 in Norway. At the time of his death, she was expecting a child. After the funeral, Stein moved to Austria, where she gave birth to her son, Franz Josef. After the war, she returned to Norway, where she remarried and gave birth to 4 more children. She died in 1994. Their son, Sepp, became a mountain climber. In July 1963, together with Werner Pongratz, he was the first to conquer the peak of Hoher Kashni Khan in the Hindu Kush. He died in 2004, aged 59. When Kutschera was shot, the killers managed to take away his briefcase and his personal weapon, a pistol, a partially gold-plated Walther PP, the 1929 model, which was the forerunner of the PPK introduced in 1931, which was used by Hitler to kill himself and later made famous by the James Bond films. Kutschera's weapon was owned by several people before ending up in the hands of an organised crime group based in Pruszków to the southwest of Warsaw. In December 2000, the weapon was seized by the police, who handed it over to the Polish Army Museum in 2002, where it can be seen today. I hope you found that interesting. I upload every Tuesday and every Friday, and on the Fridays I put a documentary style video like this one. On the Tuesdays I tend to put location ones, but it depends on what I'm actually feeling like, and sometimes I upload at other times as well in when there's anniversaries for given events. So if you're interested in this type of thing, you'll want to subscribe. But for the moment, all the best from me in Warsaw, Poland.